What's up, guys? Blade Master here with kind of an impromptu video. I wanted to share my thoughts, my first impressions on the Age of Charlemagne multiplayer. And it should give you guys kind of an indication that, me as a YouTuber, I almost never post anything apart from multiplayer battles. So to make something like this itself should give you guys an indication of how strongly I feel about Age of Charlemagne and why I think it's so interesting that I want to make something like this. Completely new territory for me. The reason why I think I wanted to make this video and concurrently my first impressions of the Age of Charlemagne multiplayer, not multiplayer, battle wise, in terms of just the battle system in the Age of Charlemagne, is very, very positive. Sure, there are a couple of areas that need to be tweaked, as can be seen in Maximus's videos, like the shield wall exploit, but I don't think those are very big at all. Well, only time will tell, and only tournaments will tell if that shield wall exploit where they always turn around, even no matter where you hit them, even if you rear charge them, they'll turn around and face you. That could be exploited, by a decent bit, but so far I haven't had a single game in the Age of Charlemagne that I've disliked, which I think is a huge step up over Attila. And I think the biggest accomplishment that the Age of Charlemagne has done in terms of battles, whether it's single player or multiplayer, is that it's somehow managed to make all the factions balanced, relatively balanced. Now, some arguments can be made that the Danes with their big axes still may reign supreme with their double-handed Dane axes, but I'll try and cover a couple of points which will help illustrate my point that this might not necessarily be the case. But first, let me try and explain why, to those who are a bit newer to multiplayer battles, why this is such a big accomplishment for CA in recent years. The last time CA properly balanced multiplayer or balanced battles was, in my opinion, Shogun 2. And Shogun 2 was incredibly easy because they didn't have a myriad of factions to deal with and a myriad of different units with different roles in the battle to deal with. So, making things balanced was relatively easy. Come Rome 2, and they have a fuck ton of factions with a fuck ton of DLCs, and balancing is all over the place. What resulted was there was always a certain period of time where 1 to 3 or 4 factions would reign supreme, and they would just be literally overpowered. Not overpowered in every category, but overpowered in the categories that mattered, and overpowered so much in those categories that no one would have a good time facing up against them. For example, it's Rome now. Now is probably the golden age for Rome 2 in terms of battles, but it's historically either been the Levy Pike spam of Bactria, or the Rome Avocati cohort spam, or it's been the Swaby Fear Rush, which is honestly that was really fun to play with, but not fun to deal against. Even Odrysian Kingdom had their little spot in the limelight, but it's always been that way. Patches and patches and patches have sort of tweaked Rome 2 to the point that it's relatively decent now. But even with 8 different factions, that's quite a bit, quite a bit of different units. There are no overlapping, if there are very few overlapping units. You can make a point that the skirmishers are kind of overlapping for each faction. They remain kind of the same. But besides that, it's balanced. It's quite balanced. Each faction has a role. Each faction can be used against any other faction. Well, I say that with the disclaimer. There are certain factions that you can never pair up against other factions, which I think improves the balance on a grander scale of this game. And that adds a layer of depth. For example, Asturias can never be used against Avars, or against the Avars. Asturias has not a single long-range skirmisher in its disposal. The Avars have the best archers and horse archers in the game. That's just one quick example that I've found. The Danes have 0 cavalry, but still can be used pretty effectively against most other factions. So can Charlemagne. Charlemagne, Danes, these are, Charlemagne, Mercia, Lombards, Westphalia, they're some of the more standard factions. Emirate of Cordoba, pretty cool faction in that it has more cavalry than the usual, and it has some Genites who have more javelin ammo in their disposal than the average skirmisher cavalry. But yeah, see, that's what I mean. Every faction has its own specific purpose, and most of the factions can be used against each other, with special cases left for Avars and factions that can counter the Avars. In which case, Emirate of Cordoba can do that pretty well because they have the Andalusian warriors, which have a 70% missile block chance. So you already see those shades of Rome 2 where one faction can counter the other faction very effectively. But the reason why I think this is better is that because the rosters of each faction are smaller, they've had time to, or not they've had time, they've made it simpler for themselves to make each faction relatively balanced. There's another big reason why I think the Age of Charlemagne battle system is doing well, and that's because they've gone back to, you know, kind of days of yore where the health has been standardized. This is a massive, massive thing. Health is at 100 for all foot units, 150 for cavalry. Now this I think is one of the biggest strengths, but also one of the major weak points that I find in Age of Charlemagne. I feel a little bit there has to be a middle ground between this complete standardization and the utter wonkiness of Rome 2 and Attila, where health was just all over the place. And I think on the one hand, having standardized health helps make it easier for the newer player to get into the game, but having, you know, slightly varying health will add a layer of complexity and depth in the game that makes the skill level higher and makes the skill cap higher, in my opinion. That leads me kind of weirdly segues into my second big contention with the game, in that cavalry plays oh man, I never thought I'd say this in Attila. Cavalry actually plays too small of a role in Charlemagne, in my opinion. Cavalry right now can be the winning factor in a game in far too little of times. If we want to be all history buffs here, we would argue that cavalry played a much bigger, very, very important role. And yeah, sure, Attila stuck to that and cavalry ran rampant, and we saw how much fun that was. Everyone's gotten out of Attila multiplayer. So we don't want to go back to Attila. But right now, I think cavalry in Charlemagne plays, dare I say it, even smaller of a role than it plays in Rome 2. Literal infantry spams in Charlemagne can work, and they can work fine. And that's because spearmen are buffed, which is huge. I love that change. I love the fact that spearmen can be used, and many spearmen can be used. Expert charge defense helps them out a lot. That's one of the good things of Attila that's been carried over, along with the hiding and guerrilla mechanics that's been brought over from Attila. But even in non-expert charge defense units such as swordsmen, it's almost suicidal to pull out your cavalry from an engaged fight. For some reason, they've changed the formula that calculates how men die when they pull away. So what happens right now is you cannot cycle charge with cavalry. Just absolutely, I think it's the same formula that they use in Attila, but the biggest point of contention when we go back to the fact that all cavalry has 150 health and it's standardized at that, it means that cavalry are just too low in HP to pull away from pull away from combat effectively. Now, Wallace Jones, who's a modder and he knows a lot about the game, said that even if you hypothetically increase the health to 900 or 800 or something ridiculous like that, it still wouldn't matter. The way it's calculated in Age of Charlemagne makes it so pulling out is just impossible. Like it penalizes your units too much. But I think that having standardized health like this is kind of a detraction, at least when we are talking about units like this, the Royal Knights and the Royal Cavalry, units that are so incredibly expensive. But if there's no real reason for you to bring these guys over something like an Iberian Cavalry, which are cheaper, which will do the required amount of damage on the charge, and will save you a whole lot of money to be used on your more expensive and on the difference makers in the sword units. So yeah, that is take that, that's just an impression. I mean, that's not like a point of that is a point of contention, and it's something that I also like. I like the fact that spearmen can be used more. I like the fact that infantry has a bigger role. But the biggest thing that I like about Age of Charlemagne is that skirmishers have a more important role. But take this with a little asterisk, in that I'm talking about archers and slingers too. Yeah, let's put slingers as well in that. But if you see, there are more factions that field archers than than those that can field slingers. Very few units actually can field slingers. Archers, though, can be crucial. From my initial impressions, I think archers are very, very important because, unlike Attila, and this is something that I touched upon in one of the online battles. I don't know if I've posted this already, but in Attila, in the base game Attila, you have units that have morale that ranges from 100, making them unbreakable, to an average of around 50 to 60, 50 to 55, and that that's rather higher range, made it so archers were indirectly not as effective, which is what led to multiplayer in Attila having just literal spams of slingers. Not to mention the fact that cavalry played a much bigger role. So slingers in turn played a bigger role because they reduced their charge bonus. But now that cavalry plays a smaller role, but it's a bit too small for me, and there is a middle ground that CA or a modder can find. Archers are significantly improved. Let me go over why. One, because all infantry right now have a health of 100 and have on average a 40% missile block chance, while archers, for the most part, still retain that 38 missile damage, 38 missile damage arrows, and I think it goes up to 44 for the Avars, and it's got a decent amount of armor piercing. Of course, it has heavy shot. The point is, the missile damage for archers has stayed relatively the same as Attila. If I can try and show you, let me go over the elements, and this is the staple, the Germanic archers. The Germanic archers have 49, which is a pretty big difference actually, and has doubled the armor penetration. But well, okay, let me change my mind then on the fly. I think archers have a bigger role because, one, slingers are fewer, and two, cavalry plays a smaller role. But three, because of the morale impact that archers can impact upon units. They have whistling shot and flaming shot. If you see, -9 morale, -12 morale, which stacks up to -21 morale. Considering the average morale of a unit, even if you look at the highest, some of the most expensive units that you can field, 54 morale, 38 morale for the average. So 54 morale, let's take an example. 54 morale for the guardsmen, 900 talents. You remove -21 from this, they're down to a measly 33. And imagine that is at base 33. If some of them have died, if some of them are fighting cavalry, so if some of them are fighting in a losing battle against a sword infantry, that means they're very liable to just, turn tail and run away. So the possibility of mixing whistling and flaming shot, which is something that you'd usually see in campaign, and it definitely adds a big layer of depth to the multiplayer community. I think if it can be used, I'm pretty sure it can be used to a great degree, is something that we haven't seen even in Rome 2. Of course, we haven't seen it in Rome 2. The morale effects don't really affect Rome 2, and in essence, it didn't. This whistling and flaming shot stack didn't affect things in Attila because all you needed was one charge with the cavalry and you won the day. So Attila became overly simplistic that way, and on the other hand, the Charlemagne, by keeping it simple with its relatively standard morale of max of 50 and hardly any units being unbreakable, by keeping it simple, it's actually made it a bit more complex. You can use it's on you to use a stack of whistling and flaming, and you can inflict chain routes among most armies. All armies. Even look at these guys. These are Gestalt knights. They cost 1,000 talents. They have 51 morale. I mean, I don't think there's any unit that has over I think the Berserkers probably have among the highest morale, 54. Avar's maybe the Avar Noble Swordsman. 30. No, that's the Tribesman. Never mind. Yeah, 54 morale for these guys. 54 morale for the General. 51 for the Avar Horsemasters. That's what I think. That's one of my favorite things in Charlemagne is the ability to inflict chain routes with an army. It makes things more historically accurate too, if I'm right. Most armies didn't really fight to the last man, as you see it happen in Rome too. Could be very interesting to see some competitive multiplayer battles with this in mind. But yeah, anyways, guys, that's my all over the place scatterbrained thoughts on the Age of Charlemagne. Highly suggest you guys check it out. It's a really good DLC, and I think it's worth the $9 because the campaign is fun and the multiplayer is also a lot of fun. Big departure from Attila, and a welcome departure from Attila. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and stay tuned for more. Peace.